use it. Can everybody hear me? Yeah? All right, no?
Not too close to your mouth, so.
All right.
People are thinking about it.
Thank you, great. I haven't got any slides because I think that way madness lies. So that's for me, if not for you. So this is just going to be, where are we? 1740, okay. So I'm going to just reiterate a content warning. Some of the stuff I'm going to be reading out is not great, let's say, especially if you are female, especially if you're from an ethnic minority, anything else. These are not brilliant people to make you feel good about yourself, all right? So I'm going to talk about the links between modern paganism, the occult, and far-right ideas. I am a pagan myself, I am an occultist. As I said at the start, I have a history in academic philosophy and the philosophy of science. I think, as Melissa said, it is actually incumbent upon us to examine our own biases and to look at where our own ideas and beliefs come from. And that is something that kind of self-examination is something I think is really important, and I do a lot in all kinds of areas. I try and be as rigorous as I can. So I'm going to deal with far-right links to the occult first. They are more far-reaching, older, and in some respects more worrying, because the origins of far-right thinking in the occult segue into New Age thought throughout the 20th century. I'm going to look at some connections between fascism and paganism per se, but it's important to realise that all this has some common roots. The person who originally was supposed to be doing this talk, as I think Emma said, was Stu Brogan. He was a heathen. He did some extensive writing on why heathenism does not mean that you have to espouse fascist ideologies, and that he was particularly, I think, quite dedicated to severing those links and stopping his own religion from being hijacked. So I just want to pay, respect to the man who was supposed to be here instead of me. Right, a couple of definitions first. In 2011, Charlotte Ward and David Boyce coined the term conspirituality in a paper published in the Journal of Contemporary Religion. Ward defined it as a rapidly growing web movement expressing an ideology fueled by political disillusionment and the popularity of alternative worldviews. It describes the sticky intersection of two worlds, the world of yoga and juice cleanses with that of New Age thinking and online theories about secret groups covertly controlling the universe. You can treat my definition of fascism as encompassing a range of far-right, ultranationalist political ideologies and movements which believe in the forcible suppression of opposition, in a natural social hierarchy, and in the subordination of individual interests to the perceived good of the nation and or race. Far-right ideas in the occult deviate a bit from this, as they tend to take a highly individualistic form, but there are a number of common themes, including white supremacy, the existence of a secret cabal that runs the world, often called the Illuminati, blood libel, and the pervasive idea that children are at risk. QAnon, for example, draws heavily, and I think deliberately, on ideas which have been around for centuries. It's a comprehensive mishmash of notions which encompass some of the moral panics which fueled the early modern witch trials. By early modern, I mean sort of 1500s onwards. Okay, so these are quite old. And it very definitely takes on board notions expressed in the late 19th century by people like Helena Blavatsky and the theosophists in occultism, people like Friedrich Nietzsche in political philosophy and Augustin Barruel, who promoted conspiracy theories around the Bavarian Illuminati in the late 1700s. So these are old ideas. The roots of the occult are many and varied. I will say later on about not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but as I say, it's incumbent upon us to look at some of the more deleterious origins of what we as occultists may believe. Writer Phil Jones explored a number of these strands in an article in 2021 for Verso, stating that many such beliefs were central to the European spiritual movements in the early 20th century. Like today, the period saw New Age charlatans flourish by selling creeds of absolution and purification, as trust in democracy founded amid imperialist war and financial mayhem. The historian Nicholas Goodrick Clark sums up the mood as the netherworld of fantasy in which progress comes to be seen as a lie and many people reject Enlightenment ideals, favouring the false sanctuaries of occultism, astrology and divination. These seemingly benign practices proved to be a crucible of Aryan and Volkish ideology, leading eventually to what Goodrich Clark describes as the ultimate dream world of the Third Reich. I don't entirely agree with that because obviously I am an occultist, and I'd like to think that not everything I believe is total shit. But it's a point of view. So the claims kick off properly in the occult world with the writings of Madame Helena Blavatsky, the Russian adventuress born in 1831. At the age of 17, she was briefly married to Nikolai Vladimirovich Blavatsky, a local Russian governor, soon left him and set off on her travels. She claimed to have visited Tibet, where she encountered a number of supernatural beings called the Masters of the Ancient Wisdom, such as an entity known as Master Moria. She also claimed that she'd been trained in the development of psychic abilities. And she began to disseminate the idea of a group called the Great White Brotherhood of Masters, clues in the name, headed by a lord of the world who lived in the Gobi Desert but who came originally from Venus. She was a remarkable woman in many ways. I do think that Blavatsky is worth looking at. She had some terrible ideas, she had some great ideas, and although a lot of her adventures, her biography, was made up, I think, she was a bit of a con woman. She is one of those figures who keep popping up in the occult. They're kind of trickster gurus. Some of them are geniuses, some of them are dodgy, a lot of them are all of those things. By the 1870s, she'd moved to Europe and she'd become involved in the spiritualist movement. She had many esoteric interests, including a belief in the magic of the lost continent of Atlantis, allegedly the home of a super race. In 1873, she moved to the USA and met a military officer, lawyer, and journalist named Henry Olcott. And together they created the Theosophical Society in 1875. Blavatsky published Isis Unveiled, which draws on Hermeticism and Neoplatonism. This also claimed to reveal an ancient wisdom underlying all the world's religions, a hallmark of many occult beliefs and groups. In founding Theosophy, Blavatsky and Olcott sought a synthesis of science, religion, and philosophy. She did leave a genuine and lasting legacy in Western occultism, both positive and negative. We'll look at her influence on the New Age in a bit. But it's thought, for example, that she was the first Western occultist to use the terms right hand and left hand path, denoting positive and negative magic respectively. She can be credited with opening up Western occultism to an interest in Eastern thought, and the fascination of 20th century occultists with India can be attributed directly, I think, to Blavatsky. As she and Olcott moved to India, I think possibly they had to flee the USA because she was prosecuted quite a lot because of fraud. Hello. And she converted to Buddhism but continued to promote theosophy. Having been prosecuted for fraud in India, she moved back to London, where she published her work, The Secret Doctrine, and other books. And she died in 1891. Her darker legacy is relevant to us here, as by this time she was promoting the idea of an Aryan super race, emerging originally from Atlantis and moving to the various corners of the earth. This is Blavatsky speaking, right? Not me. The intellectual difference between the Aryan and other civilized nations and such savages as the South Sea Islanders is inexplicable on any other grounds. No amount of culture, not generations of training amid civilization, could raise such human specimens as the Bushmen, the Vedas of Ceylon, and some African tribes, at the same intellectual level as the Aryans, the Semites, and the Turanians, so-called. The sacred spark is missing in them. And it is therefore the only inferior races on the globe, now happily, owing to the wise adjustment of nature, whichever works in that direction, fast dying out. Verily mankind is of one blood, but not of the same essence. We are the hothouse, having in us a spark, which in them is latent. So the eagle-eared listener might be saying, wait a minute, she might be dissing the Bushmen, but she's saying Semitic peoples are of the same intellectual level as the Aryans, so she can't be anti-Semitic. And she does make it clear that not Aryans are white. Unfortunately, not so fast. She went on later to say that in her opinion, some Semitic peoples had become degenerate in spirituality. Moreover, the Aryan views of symbolism were those of the whole pagan world. The Semite interpretations emanated from and were preeminently those of a small tribe, thus marking its national features and the idiosyncratic defects that characterize many of the Jews to this day: gross realism, selfishness, and sensuality. More problems come when she predicts that the sixth sub-race of the Aryan root race will begin to evolve in the area of the United States in the early 21st century. This was believed by theosophists to be arising from the Teutonic subrace of the Aryan root race, because they got very geeky about bloodlines. In Australia and the Western United States, especially, you'd be amazed to hear in California. And an Australian American subrace is emerging from Anglo peoples who moved to the Antipodes. These people will possess certain psychic powers, said Blavatsky, and for this pituitary body will be developed, thus giving an additional sense that of cognizing astral emotions in ordinary waking consciousness. They will bring wisdom and intuition, blending all that is best in the intelligence of the fifth subrace and the emotion of the fourth. Theosophist C.W. Ledbetter, who was, by the way, at the centre of a number of scandals involving young boys, goes on to claim that by the 28th century, a colony will be established in Baja California by the Theosophical Society under the guidance of the Masters of the Ancient Wisdom for the selective eugenic breeding of the sixth root race. The Master Moria will physically incarnate in order to be the progenitor of this new race. By this time, the world will be powered by nuclear power, and there'll be a single world government led by the reincarnation of Julius Caesar. After a very long time, all sexual and gender differences will be eliminated, hurrah! And then you'll be pleased to hear we're all going to emigrate to Mercury. So, basically, this kind of stuff, and its emphasis on Atlantis, is classic late Victorian nonsense. The racial beliefs and eugenics haven't gained a lot of traction when it comes to modern occultism. You will find some people who believe this in contemporary occultism, but not many. But a lot of the underpinnings have migrated into the New Age and the far right itself. Central to Blavatsky's work is the idea of being some kind of an elite. It's sort of split in that Blavatsky and et al. Seem to have actually wanted to become part of the Illuminati, rather than a group that's opposed to it. But Phil Jones suggests that this longing to be special and apart is central to conspiracy theorists who often feel marginalised and separated from mainstream thought. As other people have said, it is not unusual to feel marginalised and separated. It is in fact entirely understandable. A lot of people do, but there are many options available to you. You don't have to go down this particular path. Blavatsky promoted the idea of the Akashic records, which are the astral records of everything that's ever happened and of our past lives. That she took from occultist Eliphas Levi. Her accounts of the Ascended Masters seem to come primarily from the fantasy and science fiction of Edward Bulwer-Lytton, a friend of Levy's, who took ideas from Swedenborg and Rosicrucians and who wrote about a super race called the Vril. Theosophist Alice Bailey wrote about the advent of the Aquarian Age, and with Blavatsky also commented on the phenomenon of the astral body. Ledbetter wrote a book popularising auras in 1903 and elaborated on the concept of the chakras. Blavatsky also believed that the stars of the Pleiades were somehow occult. This is kind of a taster. Theosophy is, and I knew about a lot of this stuff, but it did surprise me when I started really going into it, how many of the ideas that are mainstream in New Age thought do come out of this particular melting pot. The term New Age itself was coined by one of the heirs of Theosophy, Annie Besant, in the 1940s. The society inevitably split into factions after Blavatsky's death. Theosophy still exists. It's actually a lot quieter and more respectable these days, although in the 40s it started spawning UFO theories as well as Atlantis, and quite a lot of people have combined the two. Blavatsky's ideas were popular and they were widely disseminated. Her ideas about Atlantis found a home in the Hermetic Society of the Golden Dawn. This is the great powerhouse of late 19th century occultism, and in some of its fellow travellers, such as the novelist E. Nesbit. Although we didn't shed the emphasis on racial superiority or the idea that we could become superhuman, those ideas aren't quite to the forefront of it at that point. It's still there, and the German occult order of the Ordo Templi Orientis, which Crowley took on, believed in the sexual re-education of the masses, which would be the responsibility of priest doctors. Private property would be eliminated, forced labour and eugenics would be introduced, while only physically perfect parents would be expected to have children. The religion of the OTO would become that of the state. If you've come across the OTO, it doesn't believe this now, by the way, it's much more inclusive. But even the great poet of the Golden Dawn, dear old Yeats, believed in social hierarchy and complained that the lesser orders were breeding too rapidly. That seems to have been more of a class than a racially motivated thing, but he did join the Eugenic Society. The Golden Dawn's Florence Farr was the daughter of a physician who was one of the first people to suggest a national eugenics policy. She didn't actually think people should be murdered, but she did think the young people needed to think a bit more clearly and carefully about the racial heritage of the people that they married. Dion Fortune, whose picture is in the back there, also suggested that reproduction should be state-regulated. And these ideas are really, really current at the time. This is classic Victorian Edwardian stuff. We find them in the work of people like Manuel P. Hall and in the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which James was speaking about earlier. So this idea of Aryan domination migrated more comprehensively into groups such as the Ariosophists, a turn-of-the-century group who believed in the prospect of German world domination, in which Gnostic priesthoods would rule over a racially pure social order and overthrow the phony elite populated by, guess who, the Jews. Quite a lot of this comes from the work of Nietzsche, who promoted the concept of the Übermensch, the Superman destined to rule over the submen. The economic misery of the German people was, the Ariosophists claimed, the result of Jewish conspiracies. And these ideas move into the Phil Society, a precursor to the Nazi Party, which also promotes the idea of Germanic glory. This came out of the Germanic Order in 1918. Aspiring members in 1970 had to sign a special blood declaration of faith concerning their lineage. The signer hereby swears to the best of his knowledge and belief that no Jewish or coloured blood flows in either his or his wife's veins, that among their ancestors are no members of the coloured races. This leads right into the Nazi Party's adoption of the concept of the Herrenvolk, the master race. The Phil Society has come to the attention of Glastonbury recently, not actually for the change via the light, but via the free magazine I Am Glastonbury, which has published a number of esoteric articles, including one about the concept of the black sun, which comes straight out of Phil Society Central Casting. That did get a lot of pushback in Glastonbury from a wide variety of people. I don't think Paul Weston is here today, but he's one of the people who knows a lot about this subject and basically kind of took it down point by point. He said it was, the Thought Society was a paramilitary organisation behind its antiquarian mystical activities. Let's not have that again, please. Jones says, today's far-right mystics similarly find sanctuary in a mythic yesterday. Comfort resides in a phantom past, a great America, destined to someday, somehow, become a radiant tomorrow, where fantastical Muslim grooming gangs and Jewish lizard people have been banished to Guantanamo Bay or some other place suited to fantasies of revenge. These ideas have had quite a resurgence recently via the work of Italian fascist Giulio Nivola, who was cited during the Trump election campaign by White House advisor and Breitbart editor Steve Bannon. Bannon seems to have subscribed to a whole sort of smorgasbord of occult thought, including Hermeticism and the Holy Grail. Nivola also subscribed to Eastern philosophies such as Buddhism. It's likely that he was an officer for German SS intelligence during the war in Italy, and he fled to Germany after the fall of the Italian Reich. He generated a form of philosophy known as traditionalism, which has been espoused by both Bannon and an advisor to the Putin government, Alexander Dugin. He believed, along with philosopher René Guénon, of whom he was a follower, that we are living in the Kali Yuga, the end of days. And both Bannon and Dugin seem to believe that because to them time is cyclical and not linear, it is our task to bring this about so that society can be replaced by something that is ultra-nationalist, masculinist, dictatorial, with a racialised caste system and a return to stereotypical gender roles, plus a kind of religion which is dominated by a spiritual elite. It harks back to what it believes to be timeless values. It's also, weirdly, although I mentioned nationalism, it's not actually in favour of nation states. It's looking to establish a world government. So you've got some interesting paradoxes here. You've got a movement that disavows nationalism, but which supports the idea of a new world order. But the New Statesman suggests, however, that for Bannon Alavo, who is a councillor to Bolsonaro, and in particular Dugin, nationalism is a two-way street rather than an end in itself. There are calls for the strengthening of borders and even more for egalitarian orders within them. Dugin frequently advocates social justice, while Bannon in theory supports progressive tax policies, may be initial steps in an effort to reverse time. First, establish a horizontal difference by destroying internationalism and crafting a world of islands. Then reinstate vertical difference with a theocratic hierarchy by sacralising the otherwise modernist and secular institutions of the nation-state. The influential acolytes of traditionalism Nationalism would thus be merely the opening salvo of a crusade to resegment and remystify the world. Nicholas Goodrick Clark writes that Evola's rigorous New Age spirituality speaks directly to those who reject absolutely the levelling world of democracy, capitalism, multiracialism and technology at the outset of the 21st century. Their acute sense of cultural chaos can find powerful relief in his idea of total renewal. And Jones says the most remarkable and enduring of Evola's ideas, called racism of the spirit, confirmed upon Jewry a metaphysical evil. The idea seeped into the Nazi Party and undoubtedly was an influence on Adolf Hitler's treatment of Jews. Today, transcendental anti-Semitism has found a new audience of zealots through publishers such as Arctos Media, who have recently rerun another of Evola's texts. And most notably, the idea appears in Evola's much-read introduction to the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, in which he concedes the dubious origins of the text, but nonetheless holds up its argument as metaphysical truths. In his telling, Jewry is a cosmic force for evil, an ineffable archetype existing behind all social ill. It is omnipotent and omnipresent, but also somehow weak and nomadic, a cowardly citizen of nowhere. One can see why such metaphysical certainty, argued by Evola with the zeal of a true doctrinaire, holds appeal for angry white men at a time when their privilege is threatened by progressive cultural forces and regressive economic ones. His thinking may appear indecisive and feeble, but these traits disguise a sturdy fatalism, which reflects the essentialism it appears to reject. Guénon was broader in his interpretation of spiritual elites, since he took on board a lot of Eastern thought, but anyone versed in Indian history and politics will note that fascism and the idea of racial elites are hardly alien to a lot of Indian thought. Evola was more explicit in the New World Order would be ruled entirely by white men.
Could you slow down just a little bit?
Okay, thank you. Yes, I will. Sorry, I'm so aware of the time. Okay. So just relations between the sexes, to Evola, involved women acknowledging their inequality with men. He quoted Joseph de Maistre's statement that women cannot be superior except as women, but from the moment in which she desires to emulate man, she is nothing but a monkey. To him, the pinnacle of gender relations was the ritual suicide of a Hindu widow, ritual violations of virgins, and whipping women were a means of raising full consciousness. And these are guys this is a guy who has influenced the thinking of an advisor to Donald Trump, and an advisor to Brazil's President Bolsonaro, and an advisor to Vladimir Putin. That's quite a point. That packs a big punch. This is not just about some little wacky movement. It's tempting to play Blavatsky and co for laughs, which I haven't quite resisted, because some of this thinking is so insane. But if you think that some of the advisors to the most powerful men on the planet actually believe that we are in the end of days, we can turn back time, and that they will then control the world, how megalomaniac is that? They should theoretically be in opposition. Dugin cites, obviously, Russia is a new great world power, Bannon is obviously pro-America. They know each other, they've met, they've referred to each other's work. So all of this is a very brief analysis of how ideas which had their inception in late 19th century occultism have migrated right into the heart of modern political far-right movements via people like Guénon and Evola. The idea of secret cabals who run the world, usually Jewish cabals, is alive and well in the minds of Bannon and his ilk. Whether they actually believe it, or whether it's deliberately misleading, hiding in plain sight, ploy to divert attention from their own goals, or both, is moot. My own view is it's probably both, because if there's a group which aims to control the world, it's the traditionalists. Plus industrialists, tech bros like Peter Thiel, politicians like Putin and Trump. You don't have to look behind the imaginary curtain for some secret cabal. It's right there in front of you. Fortunately, and due to the situation of political instability, neither Dugin or Bannon have gained more traction than they have already. I think Bannon's in jail. Dugin suffered a setback because his daughter was assassinated by, we think, Ukrainian forces. They actually got his daughter rather than Dugin, but Dugin was actually the target.
Sorry, could you slow down again?
Sorry, yeah, Dugin was the target of that assassination attempt. So, I also mentioned, I'm going segue a little bit into this. Some of the ideas that pop up in QAnon were the same ideas that fueled the early witch trials. They're also ideas which gave traction to heresy trials. Central to this is the idea that people who may be in your community or might be outside it are secret child molesters who appear normal by day, but who at night are stealing children from their beds, killing them, extracting substances from them, and using those substances for arcane purposes. In the witch panic, early 15th century in the Pyrenees and Italy, this substance was found used in flying ointment. In QAnon, it's adrenochrome. It's related to the blood libel claims against the Jews, and you still find it big time in the lectures given by New Age gurus such as Teal Swan, who claims to have been molested by some kind of satanic cabal in a series of unlikely and completely unverified scenarios.
Slow down, please.
Right.
And keep at that so best, right?
Keep at that so best. Okay.
It's really difficult at the back.
All right. Here's Dippy. George Monbiot points out that the heart of the far right is scapegoating. Conspiracy theories like the adrenochrome, like the witch panics, are fuel which drives scapegoating and doesn't look at the original sources of abuse. I'm going to skip a little bit because a lot of this talk has been about occultism, and I said there were segues into New Age thought. As I say, this is a really massive topic, and I do apologise for jumping around a little bit. But I haven't mentioned paganism per se yet, so let's just take, in the last 5 minutes, let's take a quick look at that. The far right hasn't actually gained a lot of momentum under the pagan umbrella, with the exception of heathenism. Because the Nazi Party gained such ground in Germany, and because there is a focus on the Norse and Anglo-Saxon gods and heathenism and Norse paths, links between the two often get made. There's very little in either ancient society which actually justifies this, because the conceptions of race and the conceptions of identity and nationality are totally different from ours. They're totally different. Stuart Brogan was inclined to tell people who went into Weirdrave in his Viking shop, saying that they were a Viking, that it was a job description, not an ethnic description. Heathenry's origins aren't really found in the far Viking past. They're again found in forms of 19th and early 20th century Romanticism, which glorify the pre-Christian societies of Germanic Europe. Throughout the 1900s, Volkish groups worshipping the deities of these societies could be found in Germany and Austria, and they largely disappeared after the Second World War. Their modern iterations are based in racism, that only the white nations should be worshipping these deities and that they are superior. This is actually found in some of the occultism of the 70s and 80s. I've just been rereading William Gray, remarkable man, terrible ideas, which changed somewhat when he actually went to South Africa and met some actual black people, not the black people who lived in his head. But the London School of Economics, who have done a study of the role of heathenism in prisons, say the allure of GCP for far-right groups resides largely in its perceived status as the indigenous religion of the Aryan peoples of Europe. Organisations like the National Socialist Movement and Combat 18, both widely considered to be terrorist groups, have appropriated Norse symbols, language and mythologies to construct an ethno-nationalistic identity. This imagined heritage taps into notions of racial purity and supremacy, thereby amplifying extremist ideologies. We are going straight back to the late 19th century again. I do need to stress, however, that the majority of heathens don't think like this. White supremacists are in the minority, and there are a great many heathens who dissociate themselves from these views. A lot of groups stand explicitly with something called Declaration 127, which dissociates heathen organisations from the Asantri folk assembly's stance against membership by non-white or LGBT heathens. And that's been now signed by 180 heathen groups across the world. There's significant pushback in heathenism because people get annoyed about having, again, their religion hijacked by extremists.
I'm awfully sorry, but I can't get out my hearing aid. Could you raise your voice a little?
I will try. Yes, I'm so sorry. I don't want to start the mic booming again. Is that okay? Is that better?
A little more?
Little more?
Yes.
Okay.
Beautiful.
All right. Okay. I'm sorry. I've only got a paragraph to go. So to sum up, our late starting point for this is the late 19th century, with collisions between theosophy and German Romanticism. Just because you believe in a lot of these ideas, chakras, the Akashic records, belief in Woden, the Norse deities, Celtic deities, this doesn't make you a racist and it doesn't make you far right. But I do think we need to look at the big picture, not just the relatively harmless or helpful ideas that come out of this form of occultism, but also at the negatives, because those have a very, very long arm. And they are both sinister and dangerous. Okay, I have finished now. Copy of the talk, let Emma email Emma or Melissa and I can pass it on.